Last time, gents, we recorded some wonderful cricket content. We asked a very simple question. Who is the best India Test captain of all time? Did we do that last time?
We've done it.
We've done it before.
You were
okay.
here.
Well, it was last time, wasn't it?
Yeah, sure.
With
Yes.
me.
Ganguly.
Yeah,
That's a
wasn't it?
really
Okay.
important. I mean, this is the best part of the podcast when we were talking about when we recorded something earlier.
Okay. I'm
Subscribe to the page now for more of this.
I remember watching it, but I can't remember whether I did or not. Anyway. Going to ask you a really simple question here, guys. Being an Australian, it only makes sense, Jarrod, that I come to you first on this. Bumble, you're going to get your turn on this one. But a real simple question for you. Who is Australia's best ever captain?
Warwick Armstrong. Have I gone back too far?
No, I'm with him. Yeah,
I think so. I don't think people know about this. This is really funny. He'll know about this because he loves the history of the game. Up until like World War II, right? Mm-hmm. England were kind of the evil team, like grace and bodyline and all that sort of stuff. And England were really, really like bullies to Australia, even when Australia was good, right? England was still the colonial masters and all this sort of stuff. And then this guy, Warwick Armstrong, comes along and he's just like, he once did this thing. I'm going to get some of the details wrong, but he was bowling to Frank Woolley from Kent.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
He's bowling to Frank Woolley from Kent. Debutant, comes out to play his first test, takes his guard, and Warwick Armstrong's got the ball in his hand, and he does about 15 minutes of warm-ups bowling to the wicketkeeper beside the wicket, in the days when you could still do that, right? 15 minutes. So this guy's taking his guard. He's waiting for his first ball in test. And Warwick Armstrong's just like, I'm just going to make him wait as long as possible. I don't know how the umpires didn't stop this, right?
Is that legal?
No, well, no longer. They wrote it into the laws afterwards that you couldn't do a bunch of those things, right? Then there's another test match where he convinced the umpires to allow him to bowl one over from one end and then one over from the other.
How did he manage to do that?
Because he was basically just this evil genius.
And they were scared of him, basically. They thought, yeah, you do what you want. I'm not getting involved in an argument with you.
He was not. His nickname was the Big Ship, and he was massive.
The big what?
Big Ship.
Ship. Okay.
With
just
a T on the
don't
end.
need to bleep that out, do we? There we go.
And so he was a massive dude. He had this, but he really sets the template. I mean, we'll talk about Ganguly. Armstrong sets the template for the kind of Australian captains who are kind of a little bit evil and arrogant and out of control. And he was like W.G. Grace, but he wasn't anywhere near as good a cricketer as W.G. Grace either. He sets that template for all of those guys to follow. And I think he's really, really important from that point of view. But if you actually say best captain, I think probably Richie Benaud would have to be in any conversation. And if you're talking tactically, you would throw in Mark Taylor.
Bumble, same question to you.
I'm a bit biased. I would say Ian Chappell. I played against him. And he had a family, he had a regiment, and they would go through brick walls for him. He had a wonderful team with Thompson and Lilly and Mallet and Tangles, Redpath, Edwards, Marsh. They were a fabulous, number one, bunch of blokes. But I also liked the way that he stood up to authority. He stood up to Cricket Australia on behalf of his team.
Set up a union, didn't he?
He did, yeah. on behalf of players in Australia. Very forthright, very opinionated, as brave player as you could ever come across. A compulsive hooker, you've got to get him. He was always looking for that pull shot. But also, just a bloody good bloke, in my opinion.
Who would you say was the Australia captain that kind of oversaw the most successful period in Australian Test cricket history?
Oh, good. That's a good question.
Well, so Alan Border changes Australian cricket, kind of. And I wouldn't have thought neither Bumble or I is probably going to say Alan Border was a great captain, but he was an incredible leader.
That's a good, yeah.
And he brought
What's more important?
Well, he changed the whole culture of Australian cricket, really.
Because he stopped all this sort of blorkish behaviour with Ian Botham and that. And they were mates, and he just said, we do not get involved with
We
these
are
guys.
professionals. We are going to run harder between the wickets. We're going to feel better than everyone.
We're going to feel better.
Yeah.
We're going to get tougher. We're going to get fitter. And they wouldn't have this larriking about with the England team. So he changed the culture of the team.
Yeah.
But when the question is, you think of all the great captains, Bill Lawry, Bob Simpson, Richie Benaud has been mentioned. Mark Taylor was right up there. Ricky Ponting, you've not mentioned.
So Ricky Ponting's very similar to Border, I think, in that I don't think tactically he was on the level of someone like Mark Taylor or Ian Chappell. But you talk to the players who played with Ricky Ponting, and they're like, we would have run through a brick wall for Ricky Ponting at any stage. He's remembered a little bit over here for 2005 and looking a little bit lost. But I suppose if Glenn McGrath's not available for you and your batters can't play reverse swing, you're not going to look like as good a captain overall. And it's funny, we now get Mark Taylor's commentary and we get Ricky Ponting's commentary. It's like Mark Taylor sounds like the one who wasn't a tactical genius, and Ricky Ponting sounds... So all those things I think are very confusing. You've got Steve Waugh, who of course was almost like a combination of Ricky Ponting and Alan Border in what he did, and he was maybe the most ruthless captain that they'd had. Yeah. But Michael Clarke was a brilliant tactician as well, and he's not remembered greatly because...
How many years did he do as captain?
He must have been about 4 or 5.
4 or 5 years.
Yeah, he didn't seem very popular with the team somehow. I don't know.
He wasn't always popular with the fans either. I think he's the only Australian captain I've ever seen booed at his own home ground.
Why?
He wasn't a popular guy for a long period of time.
Well, because of his character, or
because of the person he was. It was very unfair.
Kim Hughes. We mentioned Kim Hughes.
Do you know about Kim Hughes?
I know who he is. Yeah.
Do you know what happened at the end of his captaincy?
No, do tell me.
He resigned in tears, which didn't go down particularly well in Australia, in Australian cricket culture. Essentially, Rod Marsh probably should have been the captain, but there was a bit of a hangover from what had happened with the World Series cricket and the rebellious cricketers and everything. I would say it's funny when I talk to New Zealand cricketers. I'm not going to throw anyone under that bus. Actually, I will. I'll throw Martin Crowe under the bus because he's not around anymore, and he'd find it funny. You talk to Martin Crowe and you'd be like, did you think Australian cricketers are smart? And he would always say, not really. He goes, I always felt like, New Zealand cricketers were smarter, Indian cricketers, English cricketers, even Pakistan cricketers were quite smart. Australian cricketers are just really good. And they have a sense of belief that the other nations don't have. They just believe that their way is right and that their talent will overcome it. And so you probably look at Stephen Fleming or Jeremy Coney or Martin Crowe as absolute genius level captains that maybe Australia hasn't had players on that sort of level, but they've had Ian Chappell, who will go out and will hook any player in the world and will swear at any person in the world to get a wicket, right?
Never heard him say a word.
Ian Chappell?
No, never. I probably wasn't there long enough, really.
I was about to say.
Wait,
Tomo was bowling. They were so far back, they were probably talking to you. And you couldn't hear them.
You couldn't hear if they were downwind. If they're downwind at Perth, you'll have to speak up, lads. It's coming in this
Send
wind.
the telegram up to the battle.
They were a tough outfit. I mean, you're talking about 1974-5.
Yeah.
We were beaten 4-1. They were miles better, but significantly, West Indies went just after us and were beaten 5-1.
Yep.
And so they were absolutely at the peak. So who's the best captain they never had? Well, that's Shane Warne. And that was a big... It stuck with him. It was like a thorn that he wanted to be captain.
And I think we've talked about this before. I think there's an element also of the Australian captain, they almost automatically give it to the best batter. Doesn't happen all the time. Mark Taylor was certainly sliding by the time he got it, but it's generally given to the best batter. So that's not the case. England look for, someone who, generally someone posh, but someone who can lead, right? New Zealand.
Stokes posh?
Hey? Traditionally. Do you want me to go through the list?
No.
Cheru? Alistair Cook. But if you go through traditionally, and you go through New Zealand...
Wally Pope certainly is the next
New Zealand,
test captain.
New Zealand made a test captain of a guy called Lee Jamon, who you had no idea who he was, who never played a test match, right? They just went, he's the smartest guy in the country, we're going to get him in, and he can keep a little bit, and he's an okay bat. Australia would never do that. Like, Australia's just like, who's the best batter? Does he want to do it? No, he doesn't want to do it. Who's the second best batter? Does he want to do it? Okay, he's got the job.
Was it any really good batter that became the Australian captain and then form just completely dipped? Or they all normally, traditionally, some of these great players, they normally thrive with the bat? Is there one player that stands out that...
Kim Hughes probably lost his form a little bit, but I think that was more an emotional breakdown than
that was emotional.
Michael Clarke was kind of on the end of his peak, I suppose, but his back went. He ended up looking like Athers, didn't he? Couldn't move.
Yes.
He was getting bounced out by KP bowling spin at one stage, Michael Clarke. And Mark Taylor got the captaincy of Border and was probably one of the best batters in the world when he got the captaincy, and within 4 years was one of the worst batters in the world. But I don't think that had anything to do with captaincy. I just think he lost his form.
Lost
his touch a little bit. So essentially that's how they do it. It's a very different model. Like, we're talking about India before. India try and look... Quite often, India will look for someone who, can bring the team together, and the West Indies are looking... Essentially, West Indies put the best politician as their captain. Right? Darren Sammy, politician. Right? Jason Holder, politician. Clive Lloyd, politician. People who could work with different, ethnicities and bring them all together, and people of different backgrounds from different islands. And Australia's just like, he's really good at batting. he probably knows a little bit about where to put the fielders. Right, it's a very different system.
Quite an easy model, listen.
Yeah.
The bloke who's got the most runs, you'll do it. You've mentioned some of the great captains, but also some of the great cricketers. Tim Paine. Now, I know
he hasn't come up at all.
I
forgot he existed.
I haven't. I'll never forget the Tim Paine, captain Australia in the Ashes in England. Now, we know that Tim Paine became the Australia captain in completely unusual circumstances following Steve Smith. But when you think back to that time, you know, a guy that never scored a Test match 100, and I don't forget, I think it was Paul Newman, who was working for the Mail at the time, at Edgbaston, before the first Test match. You would have been there, Bumble, covering it. You turn around to Tim Paine and basically goes, you know, is it uncomfortable for you sitting there captaining Australia when you should not be anywhere near this team? And to be fair to Tim Paine, he, you know, sort of a good forward defence. But that time was incredibly unique, wasn't it? Do you kind of think Tim Paine got a bit of a harsh rap, given the fact that he had to take over and did a decent job in really unusual circumstances?
Yeah, and look, Tim Paine was lucky to be in the Test side.
Yeah.
So he was going to retire. He basically got in the Test side because there was no other wicketkeepers doing anything, and he made runs for about, honestly, Bumble, it was about 2 months worth of runs. Right?
Was it even?
It was like maybe 4 games, and one was an A game, I think, as well. And then got in the Test side, and then on the back of that, ended up being the Australian captain. I saw Tim Paine when he was young. Tim Paine, when he was young, was good enough to bat at number 6 for Australia, and was thought to be a future captain when he was 19 or 20. So it's not quite the situation that the bloke at the local pub was brought in to captain the Test team. But what happened to Tim Paine was he was playing in a charity game against Dirk Nannes. Dirk Nannes bowled a full toss, I think, smashed his hand, and he basically could never bat properly after that. And you know, it really changed the way he played, because he made a double 100 as a first class player when he was very, very young, and then almost never made another 100 after that. But yeah, he was an accidental captain.
Yeah.
And we talked about him and Kim Hughes, but both basically very similar people. They both kind of fell into it because of circumstances beyond their control.
Did they not want a nice bloke? Was that not it? They needed to clean up their act. Let's get a nice bloke.
Yeah, well, in the first series of the Test documentary, it was 4 episodes of them telling everyone they're really nice blokes now, right?
Yeah, and look, I think there was an element of that, but also I'm not sure there was anyone else who was an obvious choice.
But we haven't mentioned Cummins, who's a nice bloke.
Yeah, is he the nicest Australia Test captain of all time?
Ooh.
Oh, I'll plug that one out of thin air, Bumble.
Mark Taylor's pretty nice.
Yeah, Mark Taylor's very, very nice.
Cummins is really nice, though, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, I've dealt with both.
Well, I mean, he's eco-friendly as well, isn't he?
Oh, there we go. That's the most important thing, isn't it, Bumble?
Yeah.
And
He's got the whole package.
Exactly.
Good-looking lad.
He is so handsome.
Are you saying Mark Taylor wasn't good looking?
Yeah.
We heard this here.
Well, his nickname, I'll give you his nickname's Tubby.
I said that out loud.
You did, didn't you?
Look, I
full toss to Bumble, he's put it through the covers.
The interesting thing about Cummins is that he is nice and he's one of the most talented cricketers we've ever had.
He's really good, yeah.
He's not massively popular in Australia because he's politically active.
Right.
And it's a really, really interesting... And it's not like he's putting it on. He is literally someone who believes that the environment shouldn't burn up, which is not that controversial.
Is he a good Test captain?
I think the issue with an Australian... he's not an aggressive Test captain. He's a defensive Test captain.
In terms of tactics or personality?
Yeah, and I think Australians really like aggression, and he doesn't captain that way. And and I think there's an issue from that point of view. Like they love Steve Waugh. Do you remember Steve Waugh? Steve Waugh is thought of as this great captain who had Ellard could have captained that Australian bowling lineup that Steve Waugh had, right? Like, not saying Steve Waugh wasn't good, but Steve Waugh. Do you rememend what his tactic was at every stage? You were probably coaching against him. It was literally, well, we haven't taken a wicket for a while. Let's put in another slip. Let's put it. He'd end up with like 7 slips, and that was his tactic.
Confusion.
Right? Yeah,
confusion.
He would just keep putting slips in, and eventually someone's going to nick off. That wasn't like he was a tactical genius.
Confusion is a big asset for a captain. Make them two out in the middle. Oh, hang on.
Yeah.
What's going on? And just lose it for a second.
One more name to throw your way, Steve Smith.
Mm-hmm.
Before what happened, Sandpaper Gate, we know that. How would you have assessed him as a captain?
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Was he one of those tactically really, really good captains?
Excellent tactician. Yeah.
I thought when he came through, he might be like a sort of Alan Border, the sort of person that led by example a little bit. But you see him now. It's actually more interesting to watch him in the field now when he doesn't captain. And you realise he can't turn it off.
He don't know, didn't he? He said, I've done it many a time. He's the captain out there, not Cummins.
Yeah.
He's the captain.
People saying that during the Ashes, they were like, who's captaining this team? Smith or Cummins?
And it's a supercomputer. And you see Dhoni do it in the IPL, right? Dhoni's like, I'm not captain anymore. I'm not involved in this anymore. And he's like, but all these things are wrong and I'm going to change all these things. And you can't help it. Like, it's those guys have supercomputer brains, right? And I think where Smith struggled was interpersonal relationships, right? And there's so many different, you've been a captain before. It's like, we think of it as it's either tactics or it's leadership. And it's like, well, no, it's also understanding empathy. It's understanding how this guy can do this and this guy can't do this. It's understanding that this guy's injured and I can push this guy and I can't yell at this guy. It's all these different parts.
Again, that's coaching as well. Yeah. Although, when I was coaching, I was just there for the captain. I'm there to help him out. It's his team. Yeah. He does the tactics. He puts the boulders on and changes it and so on. Interesting, just going off piste a little, I watched a Yorkshire game recently. And the bowler we started to get clatter. The coach went straight to him on the boundary. Otis Gibson went straight to him. And I said to my co-commentator, I said, that's unusual. He said, you'll see that often in Yorkshire. He'll go, whilst the bowler is on the boundary, he'll go around, chat to him, and then he goes back and does his job. And it's a good conversation. Yeah. It's not a... No. It's a tactical conversation of coach, who just in this instance was a quick bowler, to a quick bowler.
Trying to imagine Brendan McCullum, because Brendan McCullum doesn't move, does he, in that position where his legs are... Imagine Brendan McCullum getting up and having to walk around.
Do you know, I thought he's with his glasses on, his cap down here, his feet up here, he's massively hungover, is this bloke. Because that's how I would be. Oh,
he's
God.
Really, I know. He's the coolest. He's like the coolest man around, isn't he?
Have you dapped Brendan McCullum?
Obviously.
I've
dabbed everyone.
He was a pretty good captain too. Another New Zealand captain. And another one who wasn't the best bat side.
Do you know what? Yeah. There we go. The best New Zealand captain. We're doing that next week.
On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.